Good afternoon, late afternoon. This is a 2-hour session on opera systems. I have no idea what that means. I am the moderator, but we will find out. And since, in the interests of time, where it would be far preferable to have discussion than hear data communication, and since all three of our artists are well known and I just Googled them all, and you can find out immediately who they are and what they do, I'm not going to read the extremely long blurbs that I was provided. So just to say that Janine Olsen? Well, it shouldn't be whatever for your name. That's the only thing.
If I want it spelled correctly, I say Olsen.
Oh, look, you see, I got it right. So
very good.
So, Janine Olsen is an interdisciplinary artist working with images, materiality, and language. And she seems to be most present in New York. Indeed. Well, welcome to our Columbia University, and I'm glad it wasn't too long journey for you. I think they're going to aim to speak for about 20 minutes each, and we'll have just a couple of questions after each presentation, and then open it up because it's the final one to a broader discussion of the general issues. I think that would serve well if you're all agreeable. And since you don't all know me, I'm a taskmaster, so after 20 minutes I'll start to hiss and glare and various other things. I won't cut you off, I'll just hiss on the side, you know. Okay. Anyway, Janine, please begin.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm, as a visual artist, I'm generally situated as a visual artist. It was really amazing to be invited to speak at the symposium as someone who actually does deal a lot with musicality and...
Janine, could you speak up a little bit?
Sure.
Because I'm even finding it hard to...
Okay.
This
so
as
as a visual artist, it's an honor to be here and to think about talking about my work in the context of music and of opera, and thinking about experiments in opera in particular as something that I feel I often come up to in my practice. My main interests are thinking about performers, objects, and their interactions, and the shape of space where they have an equal weight. In performance works, thinking a lot about the brutality of language and situations, reinterpreted through the space of performance and bodies performing. I have a distrust in language as a valid transmitter of communication, and think much more about sensory experience of bodies and the sentient life of objects and things other than human. I have a very broad interdisciplinary practice. The only thing I'm actually trained to do sort of officially, which I am a professor of photography, is photography. But my practice has brought me to a lot of different areas and interests, and that I've just followed wantonly in my life. And I think that that's actually my right as an artist and as a maker. So I'm often thinking about how to wrestle with the conditions of late capitalism, thinking about my personhood, and trying to look beyond certain Western philosophical traditions as a reminder of the material and bodily experiences interacting upon each other. Also, I'm always constantly thinking about an instability of knowledge through language, and specifically that meeting point of language and sometimes music that situates opera. It's an important way to consider the body in making meaning. So I also have learned a great deal and have and very much value collaboration, research, and hands-on making and craft to create my work. The image you're seeing is a performance that sort of started I would say all the work that I'm going to show you today. It's a piece I did in 2009 and 2010 called What? And it wrote it to be a sort of fragmentary confusion of language and power, and what it is to be human, and the failure of communication. So it's a pastiche, it's 6 parts, it ranges from this image, which is a copper pipe connecting myself and the body of the other performer, my collaborator, the amazing soprano Juliana Snapper. And you're seeing, this is a prologue of the piece, and it's us toning the duet from Delibes' Lakme, the flower duet. So there was this grasp for something of the lesbian in the history of opera. So this is, but also it's a part of this idea of materials and connection. I wanted to actually connect our breaths through this pipe, and you see the breath moving and changing the shape of the balloon. So this, but also just playing with the tradition as well, and the idea of the duet. In this piece, the first version was at the former DIA for an I was in an exhibition, but then I also was commissioned to do a performance, which I sort of put together these fragments in much the same way, on a table, moving things around constantly. And this is another part. This first version was this is the second version that we did. I called it the plugged version with constant, like playing with albums and turntables. And this was the sort of unplugged version, the first version. And in this we had a third performer who acted as a sort of a stagehand who was instructed to do specific tasks and the headage. So in this image you see her reading from Mary Daly's Gynecology, a text about some sort of desire to return to the wild in order to become women. And at the same time, Juliana and I are enacting two non-verbal communications. Hers is Charcot's Contortions of Hysteria, of female hysteria, and mine is Lean Wolf's address to the U.S. Congress in 1880 upon the, in Native American Sign Language, upon the breaking of yet another treaty with the Hidatsa. And then this is, again, flashback to the DJ battle, and it ends, it sort of hits its climax with this duet, which is based on this woman, Sandra Harold's call to her 911 call when her chimpanzee attacked her friend. And it went viral on the internet, which I could actually never listen to the recording, but I took a transcript of the recording and turned it into a duet between us. Which is a failure of the 911 operator to understand what what is being said to him. So, and then we played it where she had a Cage album, I can't remember which one, and then I had Liberace. So it was this other sort of war of the time. And the piece ended, it had some other pieces, parts that I'm not going to talk about, including a Gertrude Stein piece from Analysis of Play. But it ended with a letter that Margaret Mead wrote to Ruth Benedict about being in Franz Boas's lab, actually at Columbia. And it's about the failure of language and about like sentient, it's about the sort of sentient relationship to material. So I thought about that as like the study of human life as a kind of failure. So, and this was a companion piece to that, like this was an exhibition as well that was a part of, and these are two sculptures which are also speakers. One is based on the ziggurat of Ur, and the other is based on a beaver dam. So thinking about two architectures, like a human and an animal, the human is like one of the first Sumerian architectures built to create awe and fear in its surrounding. In that case, it's called building an empire and other things of no consequence. And then I'm going to just hop to 2014 to an exhibition that I did at the New Museum. It was an exhibition. It was a colloquium. I did two performances inside of it. I had invited guests. So it was just a lot of activity inside of a work that was kind of expensive. So the show was called Hear Here, both the sensory of hearing and the idea of place here. And it was a linguistic uniting of the sensory and the locational. The entire season was dedicated to voice as topic. Like how can we attune ourselves to each other? What are the possibilities for transformation available to art objects, audiences, and expectation? Where is the agency and language, and what does it mean to actually listen? So as you can see, the exhibition was set up to be like a theater. And in order to see the objects of the exhibition, which the objects were both for a performance that would come and from a performance that had already happened. So these were all objects that were meant to be kind of conflations of like paradoxes of the body and of place. So a mountain that's also a cave, a light that's based on the eye. So here it is oculite based instead of pulling light in, it's producing light. And then this was a horn that I made based on the ear, inner, middle, outer. So instead of listening, it's producing the most sort of bombastic. And this is a horn that I made with Chuck McAlexander, who is a horn repair person who I called around and no one would really sort of take my request. You know, they'd be like, yeah, no. But Chuck actually did. It said, you're destroying 400 years of technology. And I was like, well, why not? So we built this instrument to be both a visual marker of, and also have a use. So thinking about it having its own life in the world as well. And there were these, I made these 3D inserts are based on the vocal tract for each vowel, A, E, I, O, U. And the idea of the vowel as actually the component that creates speech from utterance. So, and those were put into the horn. So once you walked in and turned around after looking at those objects, there was this 2-channel video installation that was based on, I would say, my kind of ongoing interest in audiences and how audiences interact with culture, also connoisseurship. So it was something that I had thought about, and then I asked Corey Ellison, who is a dramaturg, and a friend who I met when I cold called her to come in, and I needed someone to come in and talk about women and feminism in the final act of Gotterdammerung. So, and she accepted and did it very happily. And so we kind of became friends after that. And I told her that I wanted to do this thing where I kind of collapse the fourth wall, and audiences become subject as much as the performers. So this piece is called Macabre Opera Show, a play on, I'm just gonna leave here for a second and show you this. This is my full screen. So we made over 100 costumes based on the arias.
Well, we've got like ladies garb.
It was like you could be a rich person, a poor person, Lucia de Lammermoor, Pagliacci. And
you know what? It's your little world. Here's the makeup. We've got brushes.
Yeah.
You know who does the makeup?
okay, let's go inside. The singers were really amazing. Corey knew them all, Sarah Helsel. And we wanted an experience where it was amazingly performed sort of standards of opera, so starting with Carmen, of different arias, and then all I said at the beginning was, you can do whatever you want. And then I walked away. And then this was being videotaped. You could see there were 4 camera people on each side shooting the piece. So then we just left people to do what they wanted. So you get the general sense of what an audience does when they're told they can do what they want. Let me just go a little further. It was really interesting. This is from Lucia. Lucia in the background. But then I took this, what was an event, and made this two-channel piece where then the audience sat in an installation and sort of had an experience of looking equally weighted at the screens between the two spaces of the audience and of the stage. And making me look like I'm actually quite traditional in my approach. So there's one screen, and there's also a crook in the installation, a crook behind the curtain. So you know the old. This was the program. There were really amazing people involved. Costumes were done by Kim Charles Kay, who I've worked with for quite a while. Amelia Watkins, Sarah Hatzel, Cameron Schutze, Robert Bolonik, all really accomplished singers. Eric Molson, the pianist. So it was a really fun night, and then it was really interesting to think about, does this translate or does it not into exhibition form, and does this actually give a way for an audience which is not an opera audience to interact with the material and have an understanding of their relationship to it, almost architecturally. Of course, there's a selfie taken because of the life we live. And in the end, sort of back behind, there's an area of the exhibition which I turned into a closet of a portion of those costumes. But as I often think, like this causes me some conflicts in institutions sometimes, but I then went on to write a piece, and I've been working on it over a year as a written work, and I needed to use those pieces that you saw in the first slide, like the mountain that was a cave, the instrument, and the light. So I put the sun. Sometimes objects are made to be used, because I do believe that is true. And I started and I've been working on this piece, and it was a piece in 2 acts and 23 parts, really disjunctive. It had 6 performers, very different kinds of performers. One was not even usually a performer. And we used these objects to, to make the work. This is the set list, which is also always hanging on the wall, and it was in the New Museum's theater, which is kind of a white box. It's not a black box. And then let me show just the beginning of an excerpt of that. Sorry, I really need to move to. Lost. So this is an excerpt of Here, which is that performance at the museum. And for this piece, the performers were Beth Griffith, Kelly, well, I should say, well, I'll just talk about it.
Mountain metaphors have a number of advantages over the sports metaphors of baseball and football, commonly used in business today. As we have noted, the summit of a peak is one of the clearest and most powerful metaphors for achieving a goal or objective.
The flexibility of mountain metaphors makes it easier to formulate win-win approaches to cooperative business ventures.
Although climbers can compete with each other or the mountain, they don't have to.
I think it's clear from our progress today which path is preferable and which path we have chosen. Preferable path! We know that the problems we face are made by human beings. That means it's within our capacity to solve them.
Problem solve capacity!
Preferable path!
Problem solve capacity!
Working population! Highly stacked! Decisions define!
Promise defeat!
Detention, prosecution, compound case, politically, socially, economically, legally, borderless connectivity, favors, cannot function, we stand.
Teleconference again. Our guest today is Sister, a canine, who we live with on a daily basis and yet know very little about. She's granted us a rare interview, but I hope to get a more in-depth understanding of what makes Sister and those like her tick. We also have Professor Dara Dahl from the University of South Florida, an expert in human animal communications. Professor Dahl, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Sister, thank you so much for speaking candidly in the show tonight.
Okay. I'm gonna stop this here. And so that piece was, for me, very much a way of working through, like, language from business school, you know, like the TED Talk from a business school, newsletter about mountains. The choir is based on G8 speeches by, you know, our leaders, and then this idea of this, whenever the mountains move, they have a song which they sing about workers now it's never fair. So I was thinking a lot about that language, but about also how those six performers who, you know, so would sort of navigate the stage and navigate the material that I had given them to work with. And then there was two composers, Kelly Pratt, who wrote for the horn, and Rainey Ortica, who wrote the sort of general sound for the piece. And there was another, both Rainey and John Michael Schwartz played the cello. So that was just a very small way to have a kind of musicality throughout in a kind of traditional sense, actually. And from working on that piece,
Jimmy,
yes?
You're at 20, so
I'm
you
at
can
20?
decide now what you want to do.
Could you give me 5 more? Is it? I thought I had 25. Okay. And I'd also become much more interested in material and the material transfer of information. And I moved into this another project at the Hammer Museum that I ended up, I'm showing you in the cell shop from the Hammer Museum this past May, June, like summer. And it was a project called Conduct Matters or Conduct Matters. And I was thinking specifically about copper and what is conduct. Like, it's an ethical action, it's a electrical action, it's an action of like conducting as well, or moving affairs in musicality. So I wanted to think about how copper is everywhere around us materially, and yet we rarely think about it, right? And to think about how with humor and pathos and pleasure, that there can be a way that there can be catalytic objects and instruments, and then working off of the performance, that past performance, I started to think about how I missed like sight, like actual place, and as well as expanding the idea of sight as a visual side. So I started. One of the first things I made was this weaving, which is based on the platter in 3D imaging, so it situates objects in virtual space, but in this case it's a sort of raked stage, which ends up being used in this 3-channel video called Crossed Wires. And then in another piece was this Matterphone. It's a low-frequency tactile transducer on a terracotta bell, where you can really see the connections of the copper wire, and also it's connected with this monitor piece, which is a hand-cast glass. So thinking really about like a kind of a material relationship to how we hear and see things, very rarely in real situated relationship. So this is a copper line that I shot at for the video as well. And it's sort of imbricated by the copper wire. This is I'm just follow up with this, that I built another instrument which has a flute mouthpiece, and I blew these glass chambers, like resonance chambers, and there are also temperature sensors in front of the mouthpiece, but then also behind the valves. And so I wanted to think about having this kind of external lung or breath apparatus that could that could sort of split the breath from the analog sound into digital sound, and sort of a digital production of data, a data set that would then go through Arduino. So and these are there's different sizes of resonance chambers, which only changed it like slightly, maybe quarter tones. And then this is a performance that I ended up doing called Breathe in the World, or the Problems with You, Me, Hear, and See. And it was myself, Scott Kazan, who took the digital data, and Tim Aaron, who took the analog data, and then there was a sort of stagehand character. I called her the sort of Robert Morris, if you know the history of sculpture, who situated the props throughout the piece, and that set the timing. And then Sharon Kim, who's a really amazing young experimental vocalist, sang these different pieces which I'd written, and we worked through the kind of musicality of like thinking through her breath, but it's a lot. The texts were a lot about how to navigate the body, like what comes out of the body and stays inside of the body, and it ends with a phone call that. So I was thinking a lot about fear and anxiety in the external world. So it ends with a phone call that from Silence of the Lambs, where Starling gets a phone call from Hannibal Lecter when she thinks everything is finally done, and it's not. So I was just sort of playing with that. Then I'll stop there. Okay, I would have shown a video of that, but you know.
Maybe so. Maybe just a couple of questions.
Which video? Do you want to see the video that was in the installation or the video of the instrument? Okay. The noise. Sorry, this is also taking some time. I thought I opened that one, it somehow got closed. There we go. So as the data set went up, the pitch went up, and we also